The Office of the Ombudsman, National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces was announced following the release of the scathing Somalia Inquiry Report back in 1997. That inquiry had uncovered numerous cases of blatant abuse of authority by the military chain of command and senior-level bureaucrats in the department. Although the senior brass recalcitrantly submitted to the recommendation for an ombudsman as a form of independent oversight, there was no rush to fill the job. It was only after a string of military sex abuse stories once again rocked the CAF in the spring of 1998 that the Liberal government of the day was motivated to actually do something. To give the appearance of accepting a somewhat independent watchdog, Andre Moran was named Canada's first military ombudsman in June 1998. It's time to target just how independent is the Office of the Ombudsman for CAF and D&D after more than 25 years and 5 different incumbents. On Monday, February 26, current Ombudsman, National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces Mr. Gregory Lick testified before Parliament's Standing Committee on National Defence. Lick's term of service will end this July, and as such, one could say that he is no longer pulling any punches. In his opening statement, Lick reminded the committee that he, along with every one of his predecessors, has argued for the legislation that would allow his office to truly work as an independent watchdog.
Without legislation, my organization is subject to oversight and investigation by the same department it is mandated to oversee. The conflict here is obvious. In the past, this has resulted in problematic investigations of this office that completely lacked credibility. In one case, the department investigated my predecessor and staff in a process so riddled with procedural defects and unfairness that it raised concerns that the process was being abused.
The Ombudsman further highlighted his office's lack of independence by citing a previous case wherein his predecessor and staff were subject to an investigative process by D&D, the department it oversees. Though a federal court judge found the process to be highly problematic and lacking procedural fairness, nobody has been held to account, and nothing stops this from happening again.
For one implicated member of our staff, the federal court was categorical. The individual, quote, was denied procedural fairness in the investigation and in the decision-making process, end quote. No one has yet been held accountable. There is nothing to prevent this from happening again.
Then there is the problem of D&D's lack of timely responses to those recommendations that are put forward by the Ombudsman's office.
Le ministre de la Défense nationale n'est pas tenu par la loi de donner suite aux recommandations contenues dans les rapports du Bureau de l'Ombudsman. Nos rapports, qui sont fondés sur des éléments probants, visent à éliminer les problèmes systémiques auxquels est confrontée la communauté de la défense. In fact, responses to our reports are increasingly months late and contain no tangible implementation details, despite the fact that we know the department has developed them. Where is the choke point? Soyons clairs, en ce qui concerne les dossiers individuels, notre organisation réussit extrêmement bien à obtenir des résultats équitables pour nos combattants. However, with our systemic recommendations, the department and the CAF have not progressed sufficiently. We have historically lacked evidence on the implementation of these recommendations. Consequently, we regularly follow up with the department and the CAF and issue report cards based on what we see. This is a best practice in oversight, but the results are often not promising.
One example given by Lick was the fact that D&D and CAF has taken several months to respond to recommendations made by him to improve the access to mental health care support for reservists.
À l'automne 2023, j'ai publié un rapport portant sur la détermination des besoins en matière de santé mentale et de soutien des réservistes qui participent aux opérations nationales. 5 mois plus tard, je n'ai toujours pas reçu de réponse du ministre. Before I leave this post on July 2nd this year, I will release a report that will address issues related to CAF complaint mechanisms. Will we have to wait months again for a response? Is this how you wish accountability to work?
Given the current critical shortage of personnel that is now crippling all 3 branches of the CAF, the Ombudsman rightly believes that more should be done to address the key concerns affecting the retention of serving members.
Il y a 3 semaines, devant ce comité, j'ai indiqué que les problèmes liés à la famille constituent la principale raison pour laquelle les militaires quittent les forces canadiennes. Logiquement, le fait de régler les problèmes relatifs aux familles aiderait à la rétention des militaires. Notre bureau signale les problèmes des familles militaires depuis plus de 10 ans. As members of Parliament, you are not unaffected by these issues, facing military members and their families. That is precisely why, in the estimation of myself and my predecessors, this office needs to report to the People's House, this House, and not just one member of it, especially when the issues involve more than the Department of National Defence and could be matters of national security.
To drive home the point that the Ombudsman needs to answer to more than one elected official, Lick cited a recent case that actually stemmed from the Minister of National Defence himself.
Ministerial responses to previous governance reports have usually been things are fine. And if they are not, pick up the phone and call me. But as my predecessor faced in 2018, what happens when this person is the source of the problem or refuses to listen?
Here, Greg Lick is calling out former Minister of National Defence Harjit Sajjan for being the problem, while voicing support for former Ombudsman Gary Walbourne. Lick then hints at how he may have to resort to unconventional methods to put the spotlight on future pressing issues.
If I cannot get the attention of the minister, should I set up more meetings with members of all parties? Should I resort to using the media? How does Parliament want to ensure ministerial accountability if it does not have a completely independent body providing it with advice and recommendations?
The Ombudsman then made the startling comparison between oversight measures in place for criminals compared to those who serve in the military.
We have fully legislated oversight for federally incarcerated inmates, those who commit serious crimes. Why do those who proudly wear a military uniform, on whom we depend for national security, not have the same? Cela n'a pas de sens. Canada is the only member of the Five Eyes to not have legislated military oversight. You can change that.
During the Q&A portion of that same committee meeting, Lindsay Matheson, the NDP MP from London Fanshawe, was able to elicit some blunt answers from the Ombudsman.
Mr. Lick, when the Deputy Minister, Bill Matthews, appeared at this study, he said that he had loosened some of the financial controls related to the administration of her office. Was that the case?
No.
So in a word, a very clear word, the Ombudsman tells the Parliamentary Committee that D&D's most senior bureaucrat misspoke when he appeared before them. She continued.
Have you experienced loosening of controls on the department's control of human resources in your office?
No, and that is in fact the area that is most problematic for our office, and we experience it almost every day. There are so many controls on our office that are, I would say, that are not appropriate. And not illegal by any means, but it's just not appropriate. You know, one of the principles of ombudsmanry around the world is that we should be able to hire the people that we believe are best able to do the job. But there are so many HR controls on our office that we're not able to do that as best we think we should be able to do.
Matheson then asked if this is something new to his tenure as Ombudsman.
In terms of the controls related to that administration of your office, was that what your predecessor faced as well?
I believe actually that they faced different controls and different issues, and actually probably more severe than what we're experiencing now. But in essence, it still continues. It changes. One of the issues is that it changes from deputy minister to deputy minister, and that should not be the case unless there was a government-wide process or there was a particular issue that we were doing incorrectly. We are subject to the same controls as every other public servant, but where it's inappropriate is where those controls affect our ability to do our job in an independent manner.
Next, it was the question of whether or not the announced nearly $1 billion budget cuts to D&D would negatively impact the Ombudsman's office.
When the minister came to this committee, I had asked about those Treasury Board cuts, and Mr. Kelly referenced them as well to Mr. Joshi. Can you confirm as well, Mr. Lick, whether your budget in any way or travel budgets or anything will be experiencing any of these cuts?
They have currently proposed cuts on on the travel and the contracting side of our budget. They have not been implemented yet because the new fiscal year has not been implemented, and we put forward our issues with it. I don't sit on the committees that look at these particular issues, and rightly so. We are an independent office, but in essence, we're not consulted in the same way that other senior leaders of the department are consulted. And that's problematic. I mean,
because that travel in itself, I mean, that's you going and visiting those complainants and seeing for yourself what is required.
That's correct.
Okay. So that will significantly impact the work that you can do.
I would say at this point the proposed cuts should not
Okay.
significantly cut into it, but we won't know sometimes until we get into it and find out that there are issues that we need to go and see. We need to go to a base to investigate a particular issue. These types of situations appear during the year. So we don't think at this point that the cuts will be problematic, but at the same time, the issue is again a perception of lack of independence, of interference.
Her final question was a lob ball that allowed Ombudsman Lick to once again ask for that vital legislation that will allow potentially his successor to actually act as a truly independent watchdog on a Defense Department that is defiantly opposed to any such oversight.
Based on your experience, what changes need to be made to the administration of your offices?
Well, I do repeat myself a little bit, but I think legislation and the principles of that legislation that I put forward and just talked about, I think that is one way of doing it. I'm not saying that reporting to Parliament would make it any easier budget-wise, as other independent officers of Parliament experience, but I think the biggest thing that's due to our constituents, the people, the defense community that we represent, is that real independence and perception of independence is absolutely vital. The idea that the department is not interfering in the work that we do, whether it's through a travel cut or a contracting cut, but it's also that perception.
One can only hope that the message finally gets through and Parliament finally issues the requested legislation. Greg Lick is not the first ombudsman to ask for this. He's the fifth. Let's hope the fifth time is the charm. This has been On Target. I'm Scott Taylor.